30 of them came through the trees to kill me. They moved clean, trained. A hunting line that had done this 100 times and never once been wrong. Then they saw me, standing at the center, no blade drawn, old leather unarmed, and every wolf there took one step back. Before they chose to, the leader's fist went up. I turned my head. Only my head. The amber in my eyes sat low, an ember, not a fire. I looked at the highest-ranking one, and I let him hear it once. Tell Valdric I'm coming on the first new moon after the harvest. Tell him he has until then to decide who he wants to be when I arrive. The truth will be at the sacred ground. Whether or not he chooses to stand in it, then they ran, not in panic. In agreement, 30 wolves leaving without one of them deciding to leave. I watched the trees swallow the last of them. Then I turned back to the empty clearing and went still again. 20 years earlier, I had 2 wolves coming at me at once in the training yard. Both of them already knew they were losing. I was 32 then, built heavy through the shoulders, in the way of a thing made for the work, rather than shaped to be looked at. Dark-skinned, the old training scar across the bridge of my nose gone pale with years. I moved the way I always moved. The one on my left came high. The one on my right went for the knee. Good instinct. Both of them. I gave the high strike forearm and let the low one find nothing but the place I had already stopped standing. They reset, came again. This is the part most fighters never understand, that the winning was never the point. The winning had been decided before they ever raised their blades. What I was looking for was the mistake. The one on the left, younger, quick, a good wolf, kept crossing his lead foot under his body on the turn. He had done it 3 exchanges back. He had done it again just now, so I stopped. Not because I had won, because I had found it. Stop, I said. They stopped, breathing hard, watching me the way you watch a man who has just done something you cannot yet name. I looked at the one on the left. Your foot, he blinked. The lead foot. 3 turns back, you crossed it under you. You just did it again. I stepped in beside him, slow, and set my own foot down where his should have gone. Cross it like that against a man who means it, and he takes the knee out from under you before you finish the turn. Then you're on the ground, then you're done. He looked at the dirt like it had betrayed him. Again, I said. He ran the turn, crossed it, again. He ran it, caught himself this time, halfway. Again, the 3rd time he got it. Foot flat, weight stacked, the turn clean. I let him feel it land before I spoke. There, that. Remember what that felt like, not what I told you, what it felt like. Then I looked at both of them. Good hands today. I nodded at the one on the right. You don't telegraph anymore. That took you a year. I noticed. And that was the thing they would carry out of that yard, not the losing. What they carried was that I had seen the year of quiet work it took to stop telegraphing, and that I had said so, out loud, in front of the other. That was who I was, before. The night I want you to see came after a hard one. We had crossed a rival pack's raiding party at the river, and we had won, and we had paid for the winning. 3 of ours in the ground by morning, but only 3, when it should have been 30. That was Valdric's doing as much as mine, and he found me after, in the small room behind the war hall, the place the Alpha went when he wanted the pack to believe he was being Alpha, and really only wanted to sit down. He came in with a skin of something dark and 2 cups, and the grin of a man who has just cheated death and found it funny. Valdric at 38 was a banner you could follow into anything. Pale, broad, red-brown, hair pushed back from a face built to sit at the front of a room. Pale green eyes that always seemed to be doing arithmetic, even when he laughed. He wore the pack's authority the way other men wear their own skin, like he had never once considered being anything else. He dropped onto the bench across from me and poured without asking. 3, he said. He pushed a cup at me. 3, Krave. Do you understand what should have happened at that crossing tonight?
I was there.
You were there. He laughed, short, real. You were there, so 3 of my wolves are in the ground, instead of all of them. The river is ours, and Haldr's raiders will tell the story of what waited for them at that water for the rest of their short, miserable lives. He lifted his cup. To the 3, and to the man who kept it at 3. I drank because he would not stop until I did. You don't take it, he said, watching me over the rim. The credit. You never take it. There's nothing to take. The river was a good position. They came badly. They came badly. He repeated, delighted like I'd told a joke. Listen to you. He leaned back against the stone. You know what you are, brother. You're the most valuable thing I own. And you don't believe you're worth a cup of bad wine. I should have heard it then. I have listened to that sentence 10,000 times since, and every time the same 2 words sit in the middle of it like a stone in bread. I own, but that night I heard a brother. That night the arithmetic in his eyes looked like love, because I wanted it to, because I had decided a long time ago that this was the man I would set my back against and never once look around. I'm serious, he said, quieter now. The grin had gone somewhere. When I'm gone, and I will be gone, every alpha is gone eventually. There is no one I would put at the front of this pack but you. You're not going anywhere. I know I'm not. I have you. He knocked his cup against mine, hard enough to spill. There's no one I'd put at my back but you, Krave. No one. Remember I said that. I remember. I have remembered nothing in my life as completely as I remember that. Dorn, I want you to see in daylight. We were walking the eastern line 2 mornings later, checking the boundary stones, doing the ordinary work that fills the long middle of a warrior's life between the things that get sung about. Dorn was 30 then, sandy-haired, blue-gray eyes that had not yet learned to look away from anything, built solid in the easy way of a man who had never doubted he belonged exactly where he stood. He laughed more than anyone I have ever known. It was the first thing you noticed about him, and for 20 years it was the thing I missed most. He was eating something as we walked, because Dorn was always eating something. You made the Valdric boy weep yesterday, he said around it. In the yard. Whole pack's talking about it. I didn't make him weep. I fixed his footwork. He wept about his footwork then. Dorn grinned. Same thing. It's that voice you do. He dropped into a flat, grim impression of me. Again, there. Remember what that felt like? He shook his head. Terrifying. The boy's a lamb, and you've got him crying into the dirt about his lead foot. His lead foot was going to get him killed, and there it is. There's the whole trouble with you. He pointed the rest of his food at me. Everything's life and death. A boy crosses his foot, death. We share a meal, you're counting the exits. You ever think about just not? No, he agreed, cheerful. Course not. He clapped me on the shoulder, the side with the insignia, hard and warm. It's all right. Somebody in this pack has to take everything seriously. Gods know it was never going to be me. He looked out over the stones, over the trees, easy as anything. I'd follow you off the edge of the world, you know that? You point. I'm there. Don't even have to ask me twice. He meant it the way he meant everything. Plainly. without weighing it. And when the moment came that he could have followed me, when one word from him would have been the whole world, he said nothing at all. But I'm getting ahead of it. Let me put us in the hall. The Neutral Pack's hall sat at the edge of the sacred ground, and that was the whole point of it. The one place where wolves who would have torn each other open in the open could sit in a single room and pretend for an evening to be something better. We came as guests, Valdric in his finest bone and shell at his chest catching the firelight. Me at his right hand, in working leather, no ornament but the insignia. The Alpha was the banner. I was the thing that stood behind the banner and made it unwise to test. The warlord who hosted us was old even then. Dark-skinned, white hair worn long and back. A face that had been carved by grief so many times it had stopped being a face you could read and become a kind of wall. He greeted Valdric with the heavy courtesy of a man who has buried more friends than he has living ones. He greeted me with one look that took my measure and put it away somewhere for later. His daughter served at the high table, not because she was a servant, but because in that pack, the blood of the host poured for the guest, as a thing of honor. She was quick, that was the first thing. She set a cup in front of me, and I thanked her, and she looked at me the way you look at a draft animal that has just spoken. "You're the one," she said. "The one. The Alpha's wolf. The river. Halder's raiders." She tilted her head. "They make you sound very large in the telling. You're only ordinary large." Beside me, Valdric made a sound into his cup. I looked at her. "And you believe everything the telling says?" "No," she said. "That's why I came to look." And she moved on down the table, unbothered, having decided about me, and found me less interesting than the stories had promised. I won't pretend I knew her name that night. I didn't learn it until much later, and I learned it the way you learn the name of a wound. But I remember that she was quick. I remember the exact shape of her walking away from me down that table. I remember it because it is the last time I ever saw her able to walk. The evening did what those evenings do. Formal words, careful words. Two alphas circling the thing they actually wanted from each other without once saying it. And at some point in it, unremarkable. The kind of thing that happens 20 times in a night. Valdric was not at the table anymore. Alphas leave. They have private words to trade, arrangements that cannot be made in front of witnesses. I marked it the way I marked everything, noted, filed, set aside. I went back to my work, which was standing in a warm room being the reason no one started anything. And then I heard the wrong sound. It was not a fighting sound. I knew fighting sounds the way I knew my own pulse. I had spent my whole life inside them. And a fighting sound has a shape, a rhythm, a back and forth of two intentions. This had none of that. This was shorter, one-sided. A sound that started and did not get to finish. And then it stopped. I was moving before I'd decided to move. Down the side passage, away from the warm hall, toward a smaller door, standing not quite closed. Light spilling thin and yellow through the gap. I put my hand to it. I want to tell you I knew. I did not know. There is a mercy in the half-second before a door, and the mercy is that you are still living in the world as it was. I opened it, and then I lived in the other world. There was blood. That is the thing the mind reaches for first, because it is the loudest, blood, more than a room is built to hold. Dark across pale stone, the smell of it hot and close and wrong in a place laid for a meal. 3 of them on the floor. 2 I did not know, the ones who had carried the cups, the ones whose names I would also learn too late, and her, the quick one. The one who had looked at me like I was a draft animal and walked away down that table unbothered. She was on the floor, and she was not unbothered now, and she was not going to get up. Her hand was open, reaching toward the door, toward the passage, toward help that had been one room away and had not come in time. She had fought. I could see that she had fought. In the overturned bench, in the marks, in the way she had ended up nearer the door than where she must have started. She had been trying to reach the exact place where I was now standing, and on the far side of the cup that was still rolling. That is the thing I have never been able to put down, that somewhere in all that stillness one cup had not finished falling, and was turning slow. On the stone, the only thing in the room still moving. On the far side of it stood Valdric. In the middle of what he had done, his hands were not clean. His chest, the bone and the shell, the alpha's finery, not clean. He was breathing hard, the only other living thing in that room, and his pale green eyes came up off the floor and found me in the doorway, and we looked at each other. I have lived a long time inside the 4 seconds that followed, because I watched it happen. I watched the man I would have died for, the man who had said, "There is no one I'd put at my back but you," tea with wine on his hands 2 nights before. I watched him stop being that man. It took 4 seconds. I saw the grief that was not grief move across his face. I saw him look at me and look at the dead and look back at me, and I saw the arithmetic. The arithmetic that had always been there behind the laughing. I watched it do the only sum that mattered. How do I live through this? Who pays for it? So that I do not. I saw him choose. He did not say a word. He did not need to. I had stood at that man's back for 15 years, and I could read him the way he read a room. And what I read in him in that doorway was the coldest thing I have ever known a living person to be. He had found his way out, and I was it. I had time for one word. I got my mouth open. Valdric. And the passage behind me filled with the neutral pack. They came the way a pack comes when its own ground has been opened. Fast, certain. The host's wolves flooding the corridor. The warlord's old eyes somewhere among them. They reached the open door. They saw what was in that room. 2 wolves, 3 of their own on the floor. And before I could put one true thing into the air, Valdric got there first. He was magnificent. I'll give him that, because it's the truest thing I can say about him, and the thing I hate most. He threw himself into grief and outrage in the half-instant the open door gave him, and it was flawless. The alpha's voice cracking exactly right, the arm coming up to point, every word landing with the full weight of a man who has just walked in on a horror. He did this. His voice tore down the corridor, huge and certain. I came in and he'd already, God, stop him, stop him. He killed her. He killed all of them. He didn't even have to finish. He was their guest's alpha, and he was pointing, and there were bodies. And the only wolf in that room standing among the dead was me. So they came for me. There was no explaining. There is no explaining in a corridor full of grieving wolves with a dead daughter on the floor. I knew it the instant they moved. Nothing would live in that hallway except whoever was still standing when it ended. So I stopped trying to be believed, and I became the thing I had been built to be. I went through them, not to win. There is no winning a host pack on its own ground with its own dead at your feet. I went through them the way you go through a wall when the building is already burning. I took a blade across the ribs that I would carry for 20 years. I took a strike that split my brow and filled my eye with my own blood. I broke what I had to break, and I did not stop to count the cost to them, because stopping was dying, and I had decided, in that doorway that I was not going to die for this. I hit the cold air of the outside at a dead run. One wolf going into the dark, bleeding, hunted, already a killer, and the only story that would ever be told. I was not there when he told them. I was 2 valleys out by then, lying in a dry ravine with my ribs open and my own blood drying in my eye, listening to a hunt that had not quite found me yet. But I have heard it since, from people who stood in that hall, enough times to see it. He did not rage when he told the pack. That was the genius of it. Rage is a performance, and a performance can be doubted, he told it grieving, quiet, settled, his first warrior. His brother. Something had gone wrong in me, out there in the dark. Some old violence he had always quietly feared, and at a diplomatic table, on sacred ground, it had finally come loose, and he had walked in a breath too late to stop it, and then his brother had run. That was the part that buried me in the telling, because running is guilt. A clean wolf stays and faces the sacred ground. So they did not take me to the sacred ground. Understand what that means in our world. There is one place where a thing spoken becomes true, witnessed, permanent, where a lie cannot survive the weight of the speaking. Valdric did not take my name there. He condemned me in a warm hall full of people who loved him, with no witness, no circle, and no truth allowed to stand up and answer him. Because the sacred ground was the one place he could not control. He was always careful, and Dorn was in that hall. Dorn, who'd said it plainly 2 mornings before, with food in his hand and the sun coming up. You point, I'm there. Don't even have to ask me twice, he knew me. In the part of a man that does not need proof, and he knew I had never once done the thing they were saying I had done. He heard Valdric grieve, he heard the pack believe it, and he said nothing. Not because he was cruel, I know that now, though it took me most of 20 years to learn it. He said nothing, because the only moment that would have cost him nothing had already passed. It had passed in a side chamber he was not standing in, and each silence he chose made the next one easier to choose. Until the silence was simply the shape of his life, and he could no longer break it. One word. That was all it would have taken from the one man who knew he had 1,000 chances to say it. He let every single one go, and so the warrior died in that hall, without ever being in the room. They buried a version of me that night. A version I would spend 20 years climbing out of the ground to correct. And out in the dark, 2 valleys gone, bleeding into the dirt of a world that had just agreed I was a monster. Something that had been sleeping in me for 32 years rolled over, and began very slowly to wake. I did not die in the ravine. That was the first surprise, mine more than anyone's. By the time I could stand, they were hunting me from 2 directions. The neutral pack came from the west. The warlord's wolves owed a daughter, and certain of what they were owed it for. Valdric's scouts came from the east, my own pack, the men I had trained with my own hands. He could not let me live, of course. A dead man tells no truth, and a hunted one has no sacred ground to tell it on. So I ran, wounded, the rib still wrong where the blade had gone in, the brow split, one eye half shut with my own dried blood. No allies, no proof, no version of the world left that had a place in it shaped like me. I ran, and I kept running, and somewhere out in all that running a strange thing began to happen. I stopped being afraid of dying, not because I was brave, because I had nothing left that dying could take from me. And it turns out that is a kind of power, the most dangerous kind. There had always been a ceiling in me. I had felt it my whole life without ever having a name for it, a sense that there was more I could reach, more I could be, and that something was always holding it a hand's width out of my grasp. The elders had prayers for it. I'd grown up hearing them said over the pack, low, at the turning of every moon, and I never once wondered what they were for. The way you never wonder about the wall you have lived inside since the day you were born. I know now what they were for. They were for me. For the thing in my blood that did not belong to this small, careful age of ours. The thing they had been praying back down into the dark since before I was old enough to ask why the air went tight when they said the words. Out there alone, no pack, no elders, no one left to say the prayers over me at all. The wall had nothing left to hold. It did not come off in a night. I want to be honest about that, because the story they tell makes it sound like a single terrible dawn. The warrior who walked into the trees a man and walked out a monster. It was nothing like that. It was seasons. It was the slow stripping away of everything I had been built to be, one useless loyalty at a time. Every night alone was a night. I took out one of the old certainties and turned it over in my hands and found that it weighed nothing. The brotherhood that had been a lie before I ever raised a cup to it. The pack that condemned me without a witness, without a circle, without one voice asking whether the thing they'd been told was even true. The friend who stood in the hall and knew me and said nothing. I had carried all of it for so long that I had mistaken the weight of it for my own body. And the night I finally set it down, there was so much more of me underneath than I had ever been allowed to know. It rose into the obligations left behind, not added on, uncovered. I was not becoming something new out in those trees. I was finding out what I had always been. Now that there was nothing left in the world strong enough to keep it down. There was a night I knelt at the edge of a still pool to drink. The moon was full, and the water was black and flat as poured iron, and I saw my own face looking back up at me. And the eyes in it were not the eyes I was born with. They had gone the color of a low fire, amber, lit from somewhere behind. Holding a light the water had no business showing me at that hour of the night. I knelt there a long time, looking at a stranger who was me, and I was not afraid of him. That was the part that should have frightened me, and didn't. The forest began to treat me differently after that. The deer stopped running. Old wolves with no pack and no business near me would come to the edge of my fire and lie down easy, like something they had been waiting a long time for had finally come walking through their trees. The wild knew what I was before I had the word for it. It had been holding the word a long time. The hunting party found me in a clearing. They were good. I'll give them that. They were the warlord's best. A closing formation built to leave nothing inside it. A way out. The kind of net you do not slip once it has the shape of you held in its middle. A season earlier, it would have killed me. They came through the tree line fast and certain. And they saw me standing in the open, not running. And for one breath they believed their long work was finally done. Then the clearing changed. I did not change it on purpose. That is the thing no one has ever believed. That I did not raise a hand, did not speak a word, did not so much as shift my feet in the dirt. The air simply began to behave the way air behaves before a storm the sky has not yet admitted to. Heavy, waiting, leaning toward me like the whole clearing had quietly agreed where its center was, and the light came up in my eyes. I felt it happen, the amber rising to its full strength, a heat behind the sight that did not blind me, but changed the thing I was looking out of, and I watched it reach them. I watched it land on wolf after wolf, and I watched every one of them make a decision that their minds had not yet been told about. One step back, then another, every wolf in that closing net, all at once, no word passing between them. Not one of them choosing it. Their bodies decided. Their bodies had recognized a thing their minds had no room left to hold. A presence that did not belong to this thin late age that had walked up out of an older and hungrier one and was standing in a clearing now, looking at them with a low fire burning behind its eyes. I could have ended them there, all of them, in the time it takes a man to decide to. I want you to understand that I knew it as I stood there, knew it the way you know your own hand in the dark. And I let them go. It was not mercy. I was not feeling merciful in those years. I let them live because I was not finished yet, and dead men carry no stories home. They turned and they ran. The warlord's best, the formation that left no exits. All of it running from one wolf who had not taken a single step. And they carried what they'd seen back to their own territory, the way you carry a live coal that is burning straight through your hands. They had no word for it, so the old tongue gave them one. The oldest word the tradition had kept all those years for a thing that does not belong to its time. Demon King. No one chose it. It settled. The way the true name of a thing settles onto it, whether or not anyone wanted the naming. And out in the trees, I heard the story of me begin to walk on ahead of my own body. I did not correct it. A man they will not come near is a man who finally has room to move. She came 3 days later. I never heard her. That should tell you what she was. I had spent years learning to hear everything that moved in those trees, and I did not hear her until she had already decided to let me. She came out of the tree line like she had grown there. Brown-skinned, lean, built for distance rather than weight. A blade already in motion before I had finished understanding that the shadow was a person at all. She fought the way water finds the low ground. No wasted motion, no announcement, everything committed at once. The first strike opened my forearm, a clean line, deep enough to mean it. I let it. The second caught me across the jaw and turned my head, and I felt the old familiar taste of my own blood come up, and I let that too. She was good. She was better than good. She was precise in the way of someone who has thrown this exact attack 10,000 times in the dark behind her own eyes, and has at last been handed a living body to throw it at. And I did not fight back, not because I couldn't. I want that understood the way I made certain she understood it. There was a breath, early, when I could have ended it, when the amber came up and the air in the clearing began to lean, and I could have put her down the way I'd turned a whole hunting party to running water 3 days before. I felt that breath arrive, and I let it pass. I stood there and I took what she had been saving up for years, a strike to the ribs that found the old wound and woke it screaming, a cut, then another, hot lines opening along my arms where I had lifted them, not to strike her, only to keep the blade away from my throat. And here is the thing about hitting something that will not hit you back. It does not work the way the body expects it to. A fight needs two. It needs the answer, the resistance, the proof coming back at you that the thing you are doing is working. Take that away, take away every answer, and the force has nowhere to land. It builds and builds, and then it has to go somewhere, and the only place left in the whole world for it to go is still. She slowed. Her strikes lost their certainty a long moment before her arm did, and then she stopped, chest heaving, blade still up, standing over a man who had come a long way into the trees to be killed by her, and who was looking back at her, bleeding freely, and doing nothing whatsoever about either of those facts. We stayed like that. Then I spoke, flat, without the weight of a man who needs to be believed. You're the warlord's family. Her blade did not lower. His niece. Her voice held steady, which I could see cost her something. He has spent 14 years hunting you. I know. I held her eyes. I've spent 14 years knowing why. A pause. Then I gave her the truth. Once. The whole of it, folded into the fewest words it would fit inside. I did not kill your cousin, or the servants. I came through that door after it was already done. The man who was standing in that room with me when your warlord's wolves came in behind us, he is the one who did it. I know what the story says, she said. Yes. I let it sit a moment. I know which story you were told. And then I stopped. I did not reach for more. I did not build the case. Did not soften my voice. Did not raise it. Did not do the thing a guilty man does, and a desperate one does, and fill the silence up with words until something in the pile of them starts to sound like proof. I had no proof. I had a fact. I had said it. And a fact does not need a man to stand over it, waving his arms, swearing it is so. So I let it stand there by itself. And I went quiet. She did not kill me. She did not leave. She stood there with the blade still half raised, and something working hard behind her eyes. Something I knew because I had felt the same thing crack open in my own chest out in those trees, alone, night after night after night. A certainty, meeting the one thing it could not be made to fit. The monster in her story did not bleed quietly into the moss. The monster in her story did not lower his hands instead of raising them. The monster in her story did not look like this. From 3 feet away, with a low fire in his eyes, and no interest at all, none, in whether one more person in the world believed him. It was a small gap, but she had built her entire self on that certainty. Every year of training, every mile of tracking, the whole shape of who she was, and I watched the first thin crack go running through the middle of it. Small was enough. Small was all it ever needs to be. She did not go. I sat down with my back against a tree, because the rib had had its fill of me standing, and I let myself bleed quietly into the moss, and I did not watch her. Watching her would have been a kind of asking, and I had stopped asking people for things a long time before. She stayed on her feet, 6 feet away, not closer, not leaving. We did not speak for a long time. The light moved across the clearing. The wind worked the tops of the trees. My blood slowed on its own and began to dry. And then she said it, not quite to me, more to the air between us. The way you say a thing you are testing first, to see whether it will hold your weight before you put it down on it. If what you're saying is true, she stopped. I looked at her. I did not finish it for her. I have never in my life wanted to finish a sentence less. And I left it lying there in the cold air between us anyway, because it was hers to finish or not. And there are some things a person has to walk all the way up to entirely alone. I waited, and she found the rest of it. If what you're saying is true, she said, slower now, every word set down with care, then I have been hunting the wrong man for 6 years. A breath. My uncle has been hunting the wrong man for 14. And then the last of it, quiet and flat, and so much heavier than all the rest. And the right man has been sitting comfortably in his own war hall the whole time. Neither of us said anything to that. There was nothing left to say that the silence was not already saying, and saying better. 2 people standing at the very edge of the same drop, looking down together at the size of the thing one man's comfort had cost a world that never even learned his name. She looked at the ground a while, and then she sat down. Not close to me, but in the clearing she stayed. The silence in that clearing held for 6 years. 6 years. That is how long it took the world to learn the shape of the name it had given me. You have already met what I became at the end of those years. 30 wolves in a clearing, stepping back from a man who had not moved. Let me show you how the man got there. When Sarah sat down across that first fire from me, she did not say she believed me. She said almost nothing for a long time, but she stayed. And a person who stays is already answering a question out loud, whether or not they have found the words for it yet. We did not become what we became quickly, but we became it. By the 6th year, the forest at the heart of my territory had stopped being a place I was hiding in and started being a place that belonged to me, that leaned the way the clearing had leaned, that went quiet when I walked through it, that the warlord's hunters and Valdric's scouts had both, by unspoken agreement, simply stopped entering. And across those 6 years I went to work. I did not burn Valdric's pack to the ground. That is what they expected, what the legend promised. The Demon King coming down out of the trees with fire and teeth to take back what was taken from him. I had something slower in mind. I knew that pack the way a man knows the house he raised with his own hands. I knew every patrol route because I had set them. Every supply line because I had walked them in the dark to be sure they were safe. Every formation his warriors fell into under pressure, because I was the one who had drilled the pressure into them, year after year, in a training yard a lifetime ago. So I took it apart from the outside in. A patrol would go out to the northern line and not come back. Not dead, I left very few dead, just gone, turned. Shown one thing about the man they served that they could not unsee, and pointed down a road that did not lead home. A supply route would go quiet. The wolves who ran it would find me waiting where the trail pinched narrow, and they would find that I did not raise a hand to them, and somehow that was worse than if I had. And the allies, the packs that had stood with Valdric for 20 years, that had stood with him because of arrangements I had built in his name, back when I was the arm behind his banner. Those I simply visited, quietly, one at a time. I did not threaten them, I told them a fact. I told them what had happened in a side chamber on sacred ground 20 years before. Flat, the way I tell everything now, and I let them watch my eyes while I said it. And one by one, the old alliances went cold, because a lie can hold a thing together for a long time. But it cannot survive being said out loud, calmly, by the one man it was built on top of. There was one patrol I will tell you about because of who was in it. 6 of them, on the eastern line, moving the way I had taught their fathers to move. I stepped out of the trees in front of them, and the air did the thing it does now, and 5 of them went still in the old involuntary way. That one step back the body takes before the mind has been told why. The 6th did not step back. He was young, too young to have stood in that hall 20 years ago, broad now in a way he had not been the last time I saw him. A man's beard grown over a face I had last watched weep into the dirt of a training yard about a crossed lead foot. Valdric, I said. His mouth worked a while before any sound came out of it. You're dead. It came out of him like a prayer he had stopped believing. He buried you. He said the words over you. He said a great many words. I held his eyes. Did he ever, in 20 years, say them on sacred ground? The man went very still, because he was a wolf of that pack, and he knew to the bone what it meant that the answer was no. I did not touch him. I did not touch any of them. I told Valdric the one thing I had carried 20 years to be able to say to someone who had stood in that hall and believed it. Your footwork held, I said. Whatever he had braced himself to hear, it was not that. I watched you a long while before I stepped out. You don't cross your lead foot anymore. Something broke loose behind his face. Somebody taught you well. Go home and ask the man who buried me why, in all those years, he never once let the truth stand up in a place where it could not be argued with. They went home, but not the way they had come. And that is how you take a pack apart without lifting a hand. You give it back its own memory, one wolf at a time, and you let the thing remember that it was built on something hollow. By the 6th year, Valdric had run out of single answers. The patrols, the routes, the allies, every move he made, I had already made first, because I was the one who taught him the moves. So he did the thing a cornered alpha does. He stopped trying to win the game and started trying to change it. He bound 3 packs together under one banner, more wolves than the old territories had seen in living memory. And he did it for one reason. He had finally understood that I was coming, and that the only thing he had left to put in front of me was numbers. Sarah had not spent those 6 years only following me. She had been hunting, the way she knew how to hunt. But the thing she was tracking had changed. She came back to the camp one evening, carrying something the way you carry a thing that has cost you a great deal to find. She did not greet me. She sat down across the fire and she said, "I found them, the ones who were there." I did not understand at first. "The night," she said, "the hall. There were wolves of my uncle's pack billeted in the rooms off that corridor. Close enough to hear it, not close enough to see." She had found the ones still living. She had sat with them. She had taken what each of them had carried alone for 20 years and laid the pieces down beside one another and beside everything else she had gathered in 6 years of looking. And then she told me what the pieces made. She told it precisely. The timing, the order of the sounds, a door, a struggle that was short and one-sided. A voice, the alpha's voice, low, giving an order that every wolf who heard it through the stone described the same single way. Not grief, not shock and instruction. The order for silence, given before anyone outside that room even knew there was a thing to be silent about. And then she gave me the piece I had never had. She said one of them, a woman, old now, had heard the warlord's daughter, in the last of it, say a name, not a scream. A name she had named the man who was doing it, out loud. Into a room she must have known she was not going to walk back out of. And the name, she said, was not mine. I had arrived after. I had only ever had the after. The open hand reaching for a door, the cup still rolling on the stone, the man standing in the middle of what he had done. I had carried that after for 20 years. I had never once had the before. And Sarah had just set it down in front of me. Proof that the woman on that floor had spoken the truth with the last breath she owned, and that it had been waiting 20 years inside, a frightened old wolf for someone to come and ask the right question. I did not say anything for a long time. It was not that I was deciding whether to believe her. I had always known what happened in that room. I had been carrying the truth of it alone, like a stone I had swallowed and learned to breathe around for 20 years. What I had never had was anyone holding the other end of it. That is the thing no one warns you about, carrying a true thing alone for that long. You stop expecting to be believed. You build a whole self around not needing it. And then one night, someone sits down across a fire and lays your own truth in front of you. in another person's voice, with proof that can stand up and speak on sacred ground, and the self you built around not needing it does not know what to do with itself. Something under my ribs that had been closed for 20 years did not so much open as remember that opening was a thing it had once known how to do. "You believed me," I said, "before you had any of this." She did not look away. "I sat down in that clearing 6 years ago." She said it plainly. "That was already believing you. Why? Because you didn't fight back." Her jaw set hard. "A man guilty of what they said you did does not stand still and let the family of the people he murdered open his arm to the bone. He fights or he runs." She looked into the fire. "He does not just let it happen, like he thinks somewhere that he has it coming. You didn't think you had it coming. You knew you didn't. I watched you know it with my own blade in my hand." I looked at her for a long time, and I said nothing because there was no word I could set on top of that which would not have made it smaller. And my face stopped doing the thing it had done for 20 years. The holding. The giving nothing away. I let her see it. The whole weight of it. 2 decades of a true thing carried entirely alone, setting itself down at last, in the first place that had ever been strong enough to take it from me. The word from Dorn came a few days after that. It did not come from Dorn directly. It never did. It came the way everything Dorn wanted, kept off the record, had come for 20 years. Through a wandering trader who belonged to no pack and carried things between people who could not be seen to speak to each other. The trader found the edge of my camp at dusk, and he spoke a message he plainly did not understand the weight of. The 3 packs, the alliance, the timing of it. What Valdric intended to do at the sacred ground when the day came. The trap folded inside the ritual. The wolves he would have waiting in the trees. It was good information. It was precise, and it was true, and it was exactly the thing I needed, and it was not an apology. I understood that about it right away. That Dorn was not asking me for anything, was not saying he was sorry, was not trying to climb back across 20 years of his own silence to stand at my shoulder again. He knew better than that. He knew there was no road back across the thing he had not said. He was warning me. That was all. He was a man who had stayed silent once, when one word would have remade the world, and he had found, late, far too late, the one thing he could still do, which was to make certain that this time I knew what was coming. He sent only what he knew. I read it the way I read everything now, calmly, to the end. And then I sent one message back, not to Dorn, to Valdric, through the same channel, by the same trader, who would carry it the same careful way he had carried secrets for 20 years. It was not a threat. I have never once threatened that man. I was not going to begin at the end. It was a date, and a fact. "Tell him I am coming," I said. On the first new moon after the harvest, the trader's eyes had gone wide and still. "And tell him the truth will be standing at the sacred ground that night, whether or not he chooses to come and stand beside it." That was the whole of it. I was not calling him to a battle. A battle is 2 men who both still believe they might be right. I was calling him to a reckoning, which is the thing that happens when only one of them does. His answer did not come back in words. It came back, some nights later, on 4 legs, 30 of his best, sent through the dark to end the reckoning before the reckoning could be kept. You have already seen how that went. They are running still, I expect. The nights before the new moon were quiet. We had done everything there was to do. The proof was gathered. The message was sent. The date was set, and could not be unset. The way a true thing spoken on sacred ground can never be unsaid. There was nothing left but the waiting. Sarah and I sat at the edge of the camp on one of those nights, the bone fire low and blue between us, the forest doing its slow dark breathing past the reach of the light. We had been honest with each other about everything. Everything except the one thing. We had been so careful around that one thing for so long that the carefulness had become its own kind of conversation. She was watching the fire when she spoke, not me. After the sacred ground, she said, "What happens to you?" "I don't know. Have you thought about it?" "I've been thinking about the sacred ground for 20 years. I watched the blue light move along the underside of the trees. There wasn't room for after. A pause. She still did not look at me. "There's room now," she said. "Start thinking about it." I looked at her then. She kept her eyes on the fire, on the forest, on that middle distance a person finds when they have just said a thing more honest than they meant to, and are sitting very still to see what the world will do with it. I knew what she was asking me. She knew that I knew. That was the whole of the conversation, running underneath the words. Two people who had finally run all the way out of time, and out of reasons, standing together at the edge of the one thing neither of them had ever let themselves say. I did not say it, not because it was not true, because there are things you do not spend the night before you walk onto sacred ground, where every word a man speaks becomes permanent, and I would not lay it down early, would not risk it on a night that the next new moon might still erase. But I gave her the most that a man like me had given anyone in 20 years. "I'll think about it," I said. It was not a declaration, it was a promise, and I make those the way I have always made them, quietly, once, and with every intention of being alive on the other side of that new moon to keep it. The harvest moon went dark on schedule, and I walked out of the trees onto the sacred ground while 3 armies watched me do it. They had turned a holy place into a battle formation. Pack law is older than any alpha, and pack law says the sacred ground stays open. No walls, no cover, nothing between a wolf and the truth he comes to speak. So they could not close it. What they could do was ring it. 3 packs stood in a wide circle around the stone at the center. Valdric's elite, and the neutral pack, and the 3rd pack he had bought with promises he no longer had the standing to keep. Every fighter any of them could field, weapons ready, not yet drawn. The warlord stood apart from all of it. He was old, older now than when I had last seen him across a diplomatic table. White hair bound back, dressed for war in the formal way of a man who has worn the same grief so long it has become a kind of armor. He stood at the edge of the stone circle, not in Valdric's formation, not with the 3rd pack, on his own ground, in his own position, the way he had stood his entire life. I came in on foot, alone, no blade on me, no teeth bared. A man in his own skin, walking at his own pace, into the middle of more drawn-up force than the old territories had seen in a generation. And I felt it begin to happen to them as I crossed the stone. The same thing that happened to the 30. That ancient pressure pushing up against every trained nerve in every wolf in that ring, the bone deep, knowing that a thing had walked in among them that the hierarchy they had given their lives to was simply not built to hold, but they held. They had been given orders, and they were elite, and they held. I stopped at the center of the stone circle, and I found Valdric's face at the back of his own formation. For 20 years, I had carried the memory of that face, wearing the comfortable certainty of a man who had gotten away with it. That certainty was gone. What stood in its place was the look of a man watching his own arithmetic come up wrong for the first time in his life, and understanding, finally, that it was not going to balance. The first of them came at me, and what followed was not a battle. I want to be careful about that word, because the legend will call it one, and the legend will be wrong. A battle is a thing with two sides. This had one. I did not shift. I did not draw a weapon I did not have. I let them come, and I let the old blood come up into my eyes. The amber at its full burn now, the heat behind my sight that turns the world into a thing I am simply moving through. And I took them apart the way a tide takes apart a sand wall. A warrior twice my weight swung for my head. I was not where his swing finished, and then he was on the stone, down, breathing, finished. And his own mind had not yet been told that he had stopped fighting. Another, the same. Another, I did not kill them. I want that understood, because it is the whole of the statement I came to make. I removed them. Anyone who stepped into the circle stepped back out of the fight a breath later, on the ground, alive, because a dead wolf proves nothing, and I had not crossed 20 years of dark to prove that I could kill. I had come to say one thing with my body, to 3 packs at once. I am not the monster you were told to fear. I am something older than the story, and I chose for 20 years I chose not to show you this. I am not choosing that anymore. The 3rd pack broke first. They had the least of themselves invested, and the most sense. And somewhere in the front rank, a wolf made the only intelligent decision on that field and stepped back. And then they were all stepping back, melting off the line, deciding as one that whatever the warlord had promised them was not worth what they were watching. Valdric's own wolves went second, and the crack that started it, I saw this, and I will carry it, was a young one near the front who had patrolled an eastern line not long ago. Valdric lowered his weapon before anyone else in that formation. He had gone home and asked the man who buried me the question I gave him, and he had clearly not liked the answer. When he stepped back, the rest of Valdric's pack remembered all at once that loyalty is a thing you give a man, not a thing he owns. And their alpha's composure was coming apart in front of them, and the comfortable story could not survive what their own eyes were doing to it. The neutral pack went last. They were the best of the 3, the most disciplined, the most wronged. They had a dead daughter of their own blood at the bottom of this, and they fought for her long after the others had quit. And I gave them every bit of the attention they had earned by being the only ones on that field with a true reason to come at me. But the outcome had been decided before I walked out of the trees, and in the end the stone circle was clear. Valdric stood at the center of what was left of his formation, which was nothing. His wolves had run the arithmetic he taught them, and the arithmetic did not come out in his favor, and they had done with him exactly what he once did with me. The warlord had not moved from his edge of the circle. He was watching. I crossed the stone to Valdric and stopped 3 feet from him, close enough to see that the pale green eyes were still doing their sums, still hunting for the angle, even now, even here. You always calculated that I would not survive long enough to matter, I said. My voice was flat. The sacred ground took it and carried it to every ear in the ring. I want you to know that you were not wrong about the calculation. I let that sit. You were wrong about what I was willing to survive for. And then, in front of every wolf, still breathing on that field, on the one ground in the world where a spoken thing becomes permanent, witnessed, part of the record of every pack present, I told it. All of it I did not rage. Rage is a performance, and I had watched a master perform grief in a corridor 20 years before, and I had promised myself I would never hand anyone a performance to doubt. So I gave them facts. I told them my name, not the one the legend made, but the one I was born with, and my mother's name, Halla, of the old blood, the blood the elders had been praying back down into the dark since before I drew breath. The blood standing in front of them now with the prayers all run out. Then I told them the night, the diplomatic hall, the side chamber, the sounds that were not fighting sounds, the door I opened. I told them the daughter's name. I had learned it the way you learn the name of a wound. Too late and forever, her name was Brenna. I told them the names of the two who had poured the wine and died for being in the room, Toma and Edda, names I had also learned too late and had carried all this way so that they could be set down here where they would not be lost again. I told them the sequence, the assault, the 3 deaths, the 4 seconds in which a man decided that the cheapest way to live through what he had done was to hand it to the wolf standing in the doorway. And then the frame, fact after fact after fact, in the flat, exact voice of someone who has carried an account for 20 years and has finally reached the one place where carrying it is no longer necessary because the ground itself has taken it up. Valdric tried. I will give him this much. He was good right to the end. He had been performing authority for 4 decades, and even now the performance held its shape. He denied it. He turned my own account back on me, reframed, smooth, finding the angle. A broken man out in the wilds for 20 years, mad with exile, come back to poison a sacred ground with a story. And when that did not take, he reached for the last thing he had. I am an alpha. His voice climbed into command, the voice a whole pack had obeyed for 30 years. You will not stand on borrowed ground. Alpha law does not rule here. The words were not mine. Sarah stepped into the edge of the circle, and her voice was clear and formal and pitched in the old recitation style of someone delivering evidence to a sacred ground that has been waiting a long time to receive it. Sacred ground takes testimony, she said, not rank. You know this. You built your whole lie around knowing this, around making certain my cousin's death was never spoken here, where it could not be argued with. She did not look at me. She was working. I bring witnesses, she said, of the neutral pack, billeted in the rooms off that corridor on the night in question, close enough to hear what happened through the stone. And she brought them forward, 2 of them, an old man and an older woman, and they spoke in turn, formal, unhurried, the way you recite a thing you have waited 2 decades to be allowed to say. They had heard the door. They had heard a struggle that was brief and one-sided. They had heard a voice, an alpha's voice, give a low order for silence before anyone outside that room knew there was anything to be silent about. And the woman last said the thing that ended it. She had heard Brenna at the end say a name, not a scream, a name, spoken clear, the way you name a thing into the record when you know you will not be alive to name it twice. And the name she spoke, the old woman said, into the silence of the whole field, was not the name of this man. She did not point at me. She pointed at Valdric. I watched the warlord while she said it. I watched 20 years of righteous grief find out it had been aimed, the whole time, at the wrong wolf. It is a terrible thing to see on a man's face, worse than rage, worse than grief. The slow total rearrangement of someone who has just learned that the thing he built his life around avenging was a lie. And who cares more, even now, even at that cost, about the justice being correct than about himself having been right? He looked at Valdric. He looked at me. He looked back at Valdric, and I stepped aside. I made one gesture, not a flourish, nothing for the legend. The plain, unhurried movement of a man handing a thing to the person it has always belonged to. The warlord took Valdric. Whatever justice was owed for 3 deaths on neutral ground would be paid on the neutral pack's terms, for the neutral pack's dead. That was right. Every wolf still standing on that field knew it was right. It had never been mine to take. In the silence after they took him, one more wolf stepped into the circle. Dorn. He had been at the edge of the neutral pack's line the whole time. Not fighting. Watching. The way he'd watched and said nothing. In a warm hall 20 years before, he came to the center of the stone, and he spoke in the formal recitation, which meant it was witnessed, which meant it was permanent, which meant it would live in the oral record of every pack on that field, for as long as any of them drew breath. I knew him. His voice was not young anymore. I walked the line with this man for years. I knew, the way you know your own hand, that he could not have done the thing he was condemned for. He did not look away from the assembled wolves while he said it. I stood in the hall when our alpha grieved and lied. I knew it was a lie, and I said nothing. For 20 years I said nothing. He let it stand there in the open, where it could never be taken back. That is my account, he said. I give it to the ground. He did not ask me to forgive him. He knew better than that. Knew there was no road back across the silence he had chosen. Knew that some debts are simply spoken and then carried. I did not answer him. I did not give him warmth, and I did not give him contempt. I received it the way the ground received it. It changed nothing that had already happened. It made nothing better. It was the truth, spoken at last by the one man who had always known it, and in a world built on what is witnessed and spoken, that was not nothing. It was at last something. Then I turned to the wolves of 3 packs, and I told them the only thing I had come to tell them. What you heard today belongs to the sacred ground now, I said. Spoken, witnessed. It cannot be unsaid, and it cannot be buried by any alpha living or any alpha to come. I looked across the ring. The warlord, the broken formations, the wolves who had stepped back rather than die for a lie. What you do with it is yours. I did not come back for your allegiance. I have no use for it. I let them hear that I meant it. I came back so the truth would be impossible to bury a second time. It is done now. It is yours, and I was finished. Everything I had carried for 20 years was set down on that stone, in the open, permanent. There was nothing left to hold, so I let go of the last thing. I shifted. No announcement, no ceremony. I simply allowed what I had always been, under the prayers and the suppression and the 20 years of holding, to stand fully visible for one complete breath. It did not come the way a wolf comes. It arrived the way weather arrives. Without hurry, without doubt, an old and total thing settling into the shape it had always meant to take. And every shifted wolf on that field in that moment looked like a smaller copy of a thing they had never seen the original of. This was the form the elder prayers were written to keep down. I understood that, standing in it at last. Whoever first spoke those prayers, in whatever forgotten age, had understood what I was. Had understood that this did not belong to their small, careful era, and had done the only thing they could. They had prayed it back to sleep, and it had slept, until a man took everything from me, and there was nothing left in the world strong enough to keep it sleeping. I held the form for one long moment, every eye on that sacred ground on me. Then I let it go, and I was a man again. I turned, and I walked away, Sarah fell in beside me, not behind me, not ahead of me, beside me, which is where she had been, in every way that counts. Since the afternoon, she sat down in a clearing she had come to leave. 3 packs watched us go. Not one of them moved to stop us. Not one of them said a word. And I left them there with the only question that had ever mattered. The question the whole world would be arguing about long after the last of them was gone. Was the Demon King the villain of this story? Or was he the only honest thing left standing in a world full of decorated liars? The quiet of the forest holds. Then, close, without the remove of the one who has been telling you this story, my own voice. I was the Alpha's weapon. I was his most lethal instrument. I trained every warrior in his pack. I built every formation. I knew every weakness in every structure he had, and he knew all of that, and he chose to discard me anyway. Because in the arithmetic of that one night, I was the cheapest thing he could throw away to live. He was right about the arithmetic. He was wrong about the variable. He thought he was discarding a weapon. He was discarding the only wolf in his pack who could have taught him what power actually costs when it is not built on the truth. I want you to understand something about what happened at the sacred ground. I did not destroy Valdric. I did not unmake his pack, or claim his throne, or take one thing that was his. I made the truth impossible to keep buried. That is all I ever came back to do. The rest of it, the clearing, the woman who sat down in it, 6 years of someone choosing to believe me before she had a single thing to prove it. That was never in the arithmetic. That happened outside of everything Valdric built and everything I survived. I still do not entirely know what to do with it. I am learning. If you want to know what comes next, what 3 packs carry away from a sacred ground after they have watched the Demon King shift and walk away, what the warlord does with what he holds now, and what a man does with after, when he has spent 20 years believing there would never be one, then stay with me. Subscribe. I will be here. I have called myself the Consequence for 20 years. But I am also, for the first time, thinking about what comes after the consequence is paid. If this is the first of mine you've found, go back and listen to Condemned with the Abomination Curse. Another pack. Another betrayal written in blood. Another wolf the old world should not have crossed. You'll understand why I keep telling these.